over the weekend at the Glastonbury festival, which is apparently this gigantic cultural event over in England. The monitors over at the BBC were on high alert. They were there to make sure that a particular Irish band, the one they're all scared of, didn't step out of line. You know, the one that says, "Free Palestine." They had previously been accused of waving a Hezbollah flag at a rally. So the BBC was determined. They were adamant, saying, "We're going to make sure that these guys do not say the words, you know, Free Palestine. We're on guard." They even kept the band from performing live over the airwaves, telling the public, "Yeah, you can get them on demand later." But then, they just let their guard down for the top performance by Bob Vylan. He comes on stage. And well, let's roll a little bit of what the censors missed. Audio clip plays, chanting, "Free. Free. Free. Free." Alright. But have you heard this one though? Audio clip plays, Bob Vylan and the crowd chanting, "Death. Death to the IDF. Death. Death to the IDF. Death. Death to the IDF. Death to the IDF." It's kind of a remarkable visual because you've got the BBC logo up in the corner there. And you've got these well-produced, sweeping camera shots rolling over the crowd, while you also hear that same crowd chanting right along with him. This has led to a predictable meltdown in England and around the world in response to it. Vylan himself came out with a statement where he said, "I said what I said." That was his initial statement. Then he released a longer one about how political change is important and you have to speak from whatever platform you're given. So, no, he's not backing down. The British authorities are now saying they're even going to open an investigation into whether charges ought to be brought. Dave, did you happen to watch the Glastonbury festival in real time? Is this a cultural event you're tuned into? Or did you only pick up on it after the meltdown? No. I've never heard of this. I've never heard of the event. And I've never heard of the band or this guy. It's funny because I think that's the case for, like, 99% of. Yes. That's right. I'm sure a huge portion of the Breaking Point's audience is in the same boat. But that's the thing. Essentially none of the people who are outraged about this actually cared about it or knew about it beforehand. But again, it's just, you know, I've done so many of these debates on Israel-Palestine over the last couple of years. So many shows about it. And it's like we were saying earlier, the double standards and the hypocrisy are just what's so overwhelming. The idea that after all of these months of women and children being massacred in the most ruthless ways, we're supposed to be outraged about a chant at a concert. That this is the real threat of our time. Not what the IDF is doing to Gaza. It's just very bizarre. So yeah. Look. It's fairly predictable that this was a provocative thing to do. But I think the thing that should be a wake-up call, just as you pointed out, is that it's such a huge crowd. And they're all in agreement. That's the thing that is so threatening to people who are supporters of Israel. But it should be something that everybody takes a look at. Like, hey, look what's going on here. However you feel about it, this is going to be one of the costs that comes with the policy of destroying Gaza. I still just cannot believe. 9 months later, or whatever we are since October 7th, that the pro-Israel crowd doesn't wake up to this. It's like, hey, look. Yes. The poor Palestinians cannot stop you. And as we were just discussing, it seems like for whatever reason, the Americans, including a potential Trump administration, are unable or unwilling to put pressure on Israel to stop them. America is really the only country that could stop the Israelis. And we're not. We're facilitating it. The poor Palestinians are helpless. However, you are turning the entire world against you. And for a group of people, and I say this as a Jewish person myself, I am well aware of the culture of paranoia within Jewish communities. At least in America. And maybe that's understandable given the history of how Jews have been treated in the world. But if you have that concern, if you believe there's this rise in anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, and you're worried that, oh my God, a next authoritarian, Hitler-esque figure could be right around the corner, then my God, read the room. Advocate to end this policy. Because it is coming with this consequence. It turns out you can only slaughter so many women and children before you make a lot of people hate you. And the way that hate manifests itself is not always going to be a man in a suit and tie saying, "Excuse me, good sir, I disagree with this policy decision of slaughtering women and children." It's going to look like this quite often. And if you don't want to see more of it, stop slaughtering women and children. That's a really interesting point about the crowd response, because you're right. They can prosecute Bob Vylan. Maybe they can find some laws that he broke in England. You could try to end his career. You could have prevented him from ever even going on stage. You could have said, "You know what? We've looked into your past. You've said some things we're nervous about. We're not going to put you up on stage." But what you can't do, if you're a defender of Israel, is influence how that crowd is going to respond. Because yeah, if Bob Vylan goes up there and chants death, death to the IDF, and the crowd just looks at him like he's a maniac, then he looks crazy. He looks like a fool. And he probably moves on to another song. Like that one where he's attacking British people who want their country back. And the moment is lost. But that wasn't the response. You've got hundreds of thousands of people screaming along with him. And if you are a defender of Israel, that really has to be the problem. It's been interesting to watch the evolution of the arguments around the language. We started this in October of 2023 with people censuring Rashida Tlaib on the floor of the House of Representatives for using the phrase, "from the river to the sea," in a video. The argument was that if you believe in one person, one vote, with everyone from the river to the sea being treated with equal rights, that this is a rejection of the Jewish supremacist nature of Israel. And that the people who would then be in control will slaughter everybody who's Jewish. Some pretty horrifying assumptions to make about people. But that was the argument for why that phrase is an attack on civilians. When people say, "globalize the Intifada," the response is, well, the second Intifada included bus bombings and cafe bombings. So if you say the word Intifada, you're supporting killing civilians in cafes. It almost feels like Bob Vylan took that criticism in and was like, okay, I'm going to tell you exactly who I'm talking about. The IDF. The members of the military. Who just the day before had been exposed for shooting directly at civilians who were getting aid at a Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribution site. That hasn't stopped people from saying he's actually calling for the death of all Jewish people or all civilians. But what did you make of the fact that he zeroed in directly on the military with that chant? Yeah. Well, I think it was probably a smart decision. I mean, I don't know how much thought was actually put into it. He ramps it up. Because he's like, I'm not leaving any room for ambiguity on the violence side with the word death. But at the same time, I'm not leaving any room for ambiguity on the target side. Which is the IDF. That's right. And it's so funny because you watch all of these people. The Israel defenders. Just constantly twisting themselves into all types of pretzels to somehow logically work out that it is way over the line to call for death to the IDF, because somehow that's anti-Semitic, yet calling for the destruction of Hamas is not anti-Palestinian. You see, there's a major difference there. And sure, if as we are actually enacting the supposed policy of destroying Hamas, innocent Palestinians are being slaughtered in the process, well, that's okay because we're really just targeting Hamas. Even though we're shooting into crowds of people trying to get food or destroying the entire Gaza Strip, that's still just targeting Hamas. However, simply hollering death to the IDF is an attack against all Israelis or all Jews broadly speaking. I mean, if you can make both of those thoughts coexist without contradicting each other, good luck to you. But it has been. You know, when you engage in a war in the manner that the IDF has over the last several months, I'm sorry, but you become indistinguishable from a terrorist organization. And so if you're allowed to chant death to terrorist organizations, which seems to be the justification for this entire destruction of Gaza, then I don't see why you shouldn't be allowed to do it the other way. Obviously, this is going to upset a lot of people. It's not the way I would communicate the issue. But again, there's something profoundly Freudian about what you were saying there. This foundational insight that if you repress certain urges, they re-emerge in an uglier way. I've had this thought a lot over the last few years. I remember when there was that major campaign to cancel my buddy Joe Rogan. And I remember thinking at the time, when they were getting artists to boycott Spotify because he was having on anti-lockdown scientists or something. You go. So what do you guys think is going to happen? Brian Stelter on CNN every day advocating that Joe Rogan get censored. What do you think? His 15 million subscribers are just going to go. Well, Rogan's gone. I guess we've got to tune in to Don Lemon and Brian Stelter tonight. I mean, come on. We kind of ran this experiment of mass censorship on social media for years. Did that solve any of those problems? Is there no more right-wing extremism now? No. From their perspective, it's worse than it's ever been. So again, it's like, yeah. When you've got this many people feeling this way, governments, by their nature, are instruments of force. All they can do is repress this stuff. But that doesn't mean it goes away. In fact, that's probably going to mean that it re-emerges in a much more dangerous, uglier form. Yeah. And I'm curious. As somebody who's been engaged in this dialogue and this debate from the very beginning, how have you seen it change over the last year plus? Are people coming up to you who have changed their minds, saying, Dave, you're actually right. I wish I had seen this earlier. Or are you seeing people who, after all this time, think you're crazy and obsessed and have lost your mind about this? Because you've been in so many different debates on this issue. You've got your finger on the pulse in a way that a lot of people don't. So what are you sensing about how public attitudes have changed? Because you're right. You can censor all you want. But if a chant like that is going to resonate with hundreds of thousands of normies at a concert, that's your problem. Not the chant. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's always been the case with every war in my lifetime that I can remember, when the war first launches. The war propagandists are at their strongest. Then, as time goes on, their case just gets weaker and weaker and weaker. The justification changes. And the things they were saying yesterday aren't even the arguments today. If you remember, at the very beginning of this war, whenever you would debate somebody, they would always say something like, "We can't trust the Gaza Health Ministry. These numbers have been inflated. It's not that many." Those talking points are pretty much all gone now because everybody acknowledges the death count is way higher than what they were disputing back then. In terms of the reaction from people, there's no question that Israel is a particularly interesting and emotional issue. There are people who are just dug in. And I've certainly lost some fans. I don't even know what to call them. Not necessarily friends, but people in the commentator sphere who would have had nothing but great things to say about me. If you had asked Dave Rubin his thoughts about me 2 years ago, he would have just told you what a bright guy I was. Now, it'll be, "He's a bleep. He doesn't know what he's talking about." So, I've gotten some of that. But overwhelmingly, the response from the people has been that this is just insane and indefensible. I've heard from so many people. I've gotten so many messages over the last year from people who were like, "I was a lifelong supporter of Israel. Even a couple of months into the war. I thought you were crazy and I liked your takes on other things but couldn't get on board with this." And now they just look back at it and go, "Oh. Yeah. This is just totally indefensible." The defense of the policy is incoherent at every level. The most basic one that I think resonates most with Trump supporters is that however you feel about it, even if you were on Israel's side and said, "Whatever," after October 7th, they have to respond. They have a right to defend themselves. It's so clearly not in America's interest for this thing to continue. It does nothing except engender more hatred against us. It's a destabilizing force. No matter how you feel about it. People over here are just pitted against each other over a conflict thousands of miles away that has nothing to do with America. Hamas, whose October 7th attack was by far the biggest violent achievement in its history, is probably no threat to repeat it. They are certainly no threat to the United States of America. It's just too goofy. I mean, they'll try to make it out that Iran is a threat to us, which is still pretty goofy. But Hamas? Come on. So you just can't defend the idea that America should be funding something that is against America's interest? To me, I've seen that it's been pretty overwhelming. The people are opposed to this policy. And the secret, Ryan, that I'll share with you here is that I'm actually not that good of a debater. I'm not the most brilliant guy in the world. As Douglas Murray thought was a real gotcha. I'm not the expert. There are people who know this conflict and its history way better than I do. Norman Finkelstein can recite every UN resolution in his sleep. I can't do that. But I know enough. And I just take the side that is the obvious, correct side. And that makes it very difficult to debate against because the truth has this ring to it. When people say something rings true, it's because truth just has a power that, when you're in an argument, makes it very easy to win. My experience has been that with the overwhelming majority of people, just calling out the insanity of this policy has been resonating. And I think the podcast and YouTube format has also changed it. If you're debating somebody for 3 minutes on cable news, a Douglas Murray talking point and a Dave Smith talking point can both sound plausible. You can each go back and forth for a couple of minutes and sound reasonable to people who aren't steeped in the issue. But once you're at minute 30, And minute 60. And minute 90. That's when the truth starts to ring through. And the side that is incoherent just crumbles in the face of those facts. So I think that's probably played a role too. Your willingness to engage long-form makes it so that over the space of the debate, people are like, okay, wait a minute. None of this is making sense. Yes. That's right. Long-form and a less controlled environment. That is always a benefit to the truth-teller. The more space and freedom, the more it helps the truth. I think you're totally right. When you really think about it, cable news in general is such a ridiculous format. It's crazy that it ever existed. Somebody could argue the Earth is flat on there and sound reasonable for 2 exchanges. I'm not even exaggerating. I used to do these shows. Though I don't really do them anymore because there's no point. The audience is on these internet shows. I get asked all the time to do Fox News shows. But I'm just like, it's not worth my time. But I've done it. They would do this thing where it'd be literally 3 people on a panel for a 10-minute segment. The host does 2 minutes up front. So now there are 8 minutes to be divided amongst 3 people to discuss the most important topic in the world. It's insane. It's a good exercise sometimes to trim the fat and cut your argument down to the most compelling 2-minute case. But almost anybody, even propagandists, can sound compelling for 90 seconds. It's not until you start being able to push back on them and pull the thread of all their claims that you expose how it's all paper thin. But now, and this is one of the things I'm really encouraged by, the new norm is long-form shows. Even politicians have to be able to go there. You saw Bernie Sanders on Joe Rogan's show. And of course, Donald Trump doing all the shows to help get his second term. That's the new standard. And I think one of the things people have seen, with the biggest example being Ted Cruz with Tucker Carlson the other day, is that so much of this war propaganda falls apart with just the most basic pushback. The most simple follow-up question. And that is very encouraging to me. I think that's our best hope moving forward. Yeah. I've had the same experience. I did cable for many years. And my colleagues or my wife would say, "Don't you have CNN or MSNBC in like 2 minutes? Don't you need to prepare?" And I'd say, "No. They're going to give me 35 seconds to talk. I have 35 seconds off the top of my head on whatever issue you've got. And that's not of value to the viewer. Who wants my surface level 30 seconds? But that's what they do. And they just do it every hour on repeat. What happened on that stage at Glastonbury? And what's happening in these long-form conversations represents 2 sides of the same powerful coin, the unstoppable surge of authentic human sentiment against a failing dam of censorship and control. For years, the flow of information was managed, curated into neat 2-minute segments where complex truths could be easily dismissed and manufactured narratives could be endlessly repeated. But that dam is breaking. The roar of that crowd, chanting in unison, was the sound of a truth that can no longer be suppressed. It was raw, uncomfortable, and for many, deeply offensive. But it was real. In the same way, the quiet, deliberate space of a multi-hour podcast allows for a different kind of truth to emerge, one built not on slogans, but on the steady dismantling of talking points until only the foundation of an argument remains. In that space, the truth doesn't need to shout. It simply needs time to be heard. The old guard fears both the roar of the crowd and the quiet of the long conversation, because they cannot control either. They can investigate a musician and deplatform a commentator, But they cannot silence an idea whose time has come. Nor can they edit a reality that is unfolding before the world's eyes. This shift is our greatest source of hope. It's a return to a more honest, more challenging, and ultimately more meaningful public discourse. If you believe in the power of these unfiltered, in-depth conversations and want to support a media landscape that prioritizes substance over sound bites, then please join our community. Help us continue to carve out this space for truth. Subscribe to our channel. Engage in the comments. And become part of the dialogue that the old guard is so desperate to control. Together, we can ensure these crucial conversations are not just heard, but amplified.